Hello, beautiful legends. Welcome to another episode of the Chris Andrew podcast. And I just want to start by saying thanks so much for joining me and for listening on this adventure through ideas and minds and conversations and what have you. I'm really enjoying it. What are we up to? Episode 16 or something like that. And it's just a delight to be able to jump around things that I think are interesting. And I hope that a few themes are starting to emerge and that it feels like a coherent world for you. I'm certainly enjoying it. And I really enjoy, in particular, the feedback that I get from you. There's just small notes that I get here and there from people saying that a particular idea landed or made them think about this or changed their behavior in some way. And it makes it really rewarding because we're a small community. I think each episode, as far as I can tell, is 100 to 200 people listening. And it's just so fun to be at an early stage of a project like this where instead of having to worry about brand or sponsors or any of those other sort of considerations, funders, etc., I just get to talk about what's interesting to me. And it's so nice where that lands. So thanks so much for being on the journey. There's a topic this week I want to talk about that's at the gravity of a few things that we've discussed so far. And that is the growing concentration of wealth and power in the top end. You hear a lot of this in sort of tedious political and ideological conversations. And I think it's just because it's shorthand grabs and emotional expressions from the pain that people feel from this phenomenon. But it is a real one. Since the 80s, wealth has been increasingly concentrated in the world in the hands of fewer and fewer people. And I want to talk about it now because we're surely at the cusp of, if everything goes well, and I'm pretty optimistic that if we can steer clear of major war, that it will go well. We're on the cusp of a whole series of technological advances that are going to radicalize the concentration of that wealth. What's that going to look like for us? What does it mean? What's driving some of that? We're going to look at that today. And also, I'm going to do something unusual and conclude with some ideas of what we can do with that information. I don't generally pretend to have the answers to the questions that I raise, but in this one, I think the answers are sort of timeless ones, and maybe it's just reassuring in the face of these dynamic uncertainties to realize that the centers of our lives and well-being still remain absolutely within our own hands, regardless of what the undulating terrain beneath us may look like. Before we get into it, of course, I have to say thank you so much to my Patreon patrons. Appreciate you, as always, for supporting the show. If you want to join, there's a cheap tier you can join up. There's an expensive one if you really want to support the work that I'm doing. And if you're not liquid or you don't want to give me your email address over at patreon.com/Endry, why not take a moment to give me a good review, leave a comment, follow the Instagram at Chris Andrew Podcast. All that small stuff, it makes a huge difference. And as always, if you like this episode, please do send it to a friend or someone you know who would enjoy it as well. All right, the concentration of everything. Okay, the hyper-concentration that's coming or occurring now or has already begun or whatever. Since 2020, there's been approximately $42 trillion worth of extra wealth created in our global society. And of that, roughly 2/3 has been captured by the richest 1%. Take a moment to think about what that means. It's astonishing. For all the stress that it causes, it's likely to continue and indeed further exacerbate because we are on the cusp of enormous productivity gains, potentially, with AI, robotics, and other technologies coming in that are really just going to radically change that productivity, but continue that trend of where it goes to. And before I go into some of the details of that, I want to start off by saying that this is not surprising. These are observable phenomena that have likely always existed, and despite human efforts to radically change them, still seem to emerge and exist in the natural world as well. And so I want to start, just to make sure we're on the same page in understanding this, by discussing the Pareto principle and Zipf's law. If you're already familiar with these, skip forward a minute or so. But it's always worth a refresher. Pareto principle you may have come across in productivity or other realms, but it generally holds that 80% of an outcome is caused by 20% of an input. And you can cut that with different nouns or whatever. So say, for example, 80% of a company's profits might come from 20% of its products. Or you might wear 20% of your clothes 80% of the time. There seems to be this dynamic that occurs across a lot of things. So say, for example, if you're listening on Spotify, 20% of their artists will be generating 80% of their income. And how Zipf's law works, it's kind of been described as a rolling Pareto principle, which is, okay, well, what about that 20% of that 80%, or et cetera, et cetera? As you keep diving into it, what's the rate of that look like? And Ziff's law describes a distribution of how things tend to go in systems. So the main application of it in its conception was the amount of words that appear in, say, War and Peace, or the English dictionary, for example. So, and how it ended up emerging is it about the most commonly used word, the, is used twice as much as the second most common word of. And the third most commonly used word, and, is roughly a third of that first the. And broadly, what this describes is kind of a winning distribution with a long tail on things, in a trend that seems to emerge across a lot of society. So this is why it can be so shocking to think that one person has literally billions of times what another citizen has. But seems to be the case across societies. So this trend toward concentration, where winners sort of take all from a system, is very common and exists everywhere. And it can be kind of counterintuitive, because if you were to think about, I'll just pick an example, car companies, would you think, oh, the richest car companies, they're probably all about the same, right? Like you've got Ford, you've got Toyota, you've got Tesla, Mercedes, whatever. They must be sort of about the same. It's absolutely not the case. I'll just bring it up and we could see. Yes. So number one, market cap, Tesla with 1 trillion. Number two, Toyota. What do you think they are? 225 billion. So that's radically different. Then I'll pick number 10 is Ford, 47 billion. So it's a big drop off. And that sort of scale is something that's observable. Like, okay, you pick, this is why the data is always so fun when you see, oh, the top 1% have this much of wealth. Well, what about the top 0.1%? And then what about the top 0.01%? The same sort of trends exist. You know, the richest person in the world and the 1,000th richest person in the world, they also have radically different amounts of money. Obviously, when you have that much money, it's kind of meaningless anyway. But the reason I'm bringing this up today to start off the conversation is because this is not unique to now, and it is something that's about to become extremely interesting, because if we have these threatened tech breakthroughs, they're going to rewrite society, and we're going to have to solve a lot of problems that are going to emerge from it. Because, okay, Tesla has 1 trillion, Toyota has 224 billion. What are the consequences then if the largest company in the world, say Meta, for example, have a market capitalization in the new productivity world of $100 trillion, and the biggest company in your whole country, say if it's Australia, BHP Billiton, their market cap is 200 billion? That's radically going to reshape society and changes power. And it already has in a lot of ways that I'll talk about. But the point of interest for us as people who aren't, I mean, we're not, I assume we're not in that 0.01%, and I assume that we're unlikely to end up in it. The point of interest is, what does our society look like? And then how do we respond by living our own lives? And what's likely to happen? What are the trends? I think it's interesting to look at. So the first point I would make is this is something that's happening already. It's been happening ever since industrialization in one sense, but it's happened in an increasingly concentrated way. This phenomenon is talked about a lot in America as Wall Street versus Main Street, where you've got all these small towns and cities across the whole country, a very rich country, where in each of those societies, there'd be historical towns with historical small businesses that mapped onto a unique local culture and serve the community. But now they're increasingly monoliths of, you'll have a Walmart that will sell absolutely everything at scale and cheaper than the local businesses would. So that would suck the life out of those streets. And so suddenly you go to all these towns and they kind of start to feel the same. And this struck me recently when I was driving to San Marino for the Eurovision final. It struck me how driving across northern Italy, a place I'd never been to, it kind of just felt like anywhere. I mean, there were really beautiful mountains. That's one thing. But other than that, every business that we went past was familiar. Every place that we stopped sort of sold the same types of products you'd expect to see anywhere. And it kind of almost felt like you could be in Nowra, you could be in Budaörs. It's becoming a bit of a monocultural blob. That's just the effect of selling things in the physical realm. And for Walmart to expand, they have to physically open new warehouses, have to physically open new shops, have to physically employ people. For Meta or X or Amazon or whatever, any of these places to expand, they just need to add a few more servers. And so the shift in that sort of sucking is going to be exponential. And that sucking already exists, where the money that we spend doesn't stay in our own societies at the same rate. And the wealth and the millionaires and billionaires that are generated are not local anymore, which is super interesting. So if they're not even just, say, for example, in America, and they're not even just in San Francisco, they're in very, very small pockets and fewer people. Because just a few generations ago, it would be viable to see an idea like, oh, someone has a sports shop. What a great idea. I'll sell sports gear in my town to people because they need sports gear. And that you could become wealthy in that and then live a life where you have social accountability to the people around you, and you spend that wealth where you live to improve it. Whereas now, if you have the idea of starting another web store to compete with Amazon, you're done. Like, they've got the first mover advantage. You would need unthinkable amounts of capital to build the infrastructure against what they're doing. So it doesn't really exist as an option. And the counter option is, I'm going to start a sports store. Well, that's probably going to be barely viable because you're competing with those large logistics, purchasing, and production chains. And it physically changes the shape of our societies a lot in that monocultural way, but also all of the wealth is going to keep sucking to these top places. And again, I'm just describing the physical realm. What about when all the productivity exists in AI realms? Or it's obvious that a larger share of productivity, work, and utility is going to be generated in realms of cyberspace. All that money then sucks to these very specific places, and we're going to kind of generate new gods in a sense. I mean, we already have in a lot of ways. The difference between someone in the top 1% and the bottom 90% in somewhere like the Bay Area of California is phenomenal. So what does this look like when it is times by 100, a million, a billion, or whatever it may be? It's fun to think about because it's likely to continue gaining rolling momentum as that process continues. As a style of type of thing, you can imagine that if you're head of one of these major AI companies and you have a tool that can suddenly do software coding really easily, or graphic design, or market analysis, or management consulting, or whatever it is, like at these, you don't even need to imagine because this already exists. How many firms are there currently that employ tens, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of people to do exactly those jobs? Well, you've got the power to not only not have to pay anybody to do any of that stuff, but to do the work that they produce immediately and to steal all of that market for yourself. And we're in a situation where potentially one person has the capacity to be the head of PwC in Sydney, Mumbai, London, whatever, instantly, with a single tool, and to do all the work that they do for free. Or even the advancements on the current advancements. Say, for example, where we used to pay a taxi driver who would pay their boss, who would be in your city, to take you somewhere, they pay a cut or whatever they do in the cars. Now there's a tithe paid from every single taxi trip taken basically to Silicon Valley. Or what's that going to look like when you don't even need the Uber driver to provide their own car, and you don't need to give them the 80%. It can just be an automated car that's owned by, say, Tesla, and an automated taxi system, and 100% of the money goes now to, not Silicon Valley, it happens to be Austin, but whatever, you get the general principle. These concentrations are going to be a lot higher. I want to say also that I broadly think it's good, because I don't think it's the best use of people's life to be driving around all the time. How cool to have that be automated. That's a genuine service. And so people that generate that stuff deserve to be rewarded. And it frees up the people that are doing that driving currently to do something else with their life. The problem is, what are they going to do to make money? Because you can't just buy things on Amazon for a living. So that's a big problem that we're going to have to solve. I have no idea how to begin to do that. But what you can be sure is that that extra tithe that we're currently paying to all these tech companies, that's about to massively increase. This is explored by a book on my shelf, actually, Yuval Noah Harari. I haven't read the book because, despite all my own preaching, I don't really like reading futurism stuff because it's hard to predict, and if you're publishing a book, you're sort of claiming to know something. But I understand that in that book, he's exploring that once we have these tech trillionaires or what have you, we're going to have a class of people who will have access to a new means of productivity and a new means of living that strips the gap between the richest person on the planet and the poorest person on the planet exponentially. So this is going to exist in a number of ways, but we alluded to many of them in the very first episode of this podcast with Dr. Jamie Freestone. With technologies like CRISPR, you could have trillionaires changing their genes to be able to reverse aging or add strength or intelligence or whatever it may be. And also, in particular, the sort of biomods that we might get from companies such as Neuralink. I mean, what would you do if you could double your capacity to remember things, or triple the speed of your processing, or any number of other things? You know, designer drugs that enable this. I don't even know. It's largely speculative, but it is mechanically something we can visualize, and something that is far more likely than not to be real within our lifetimes. So yes, or even to pick somebody now, Elon Musk, Zuckerberg, Sam Altman, how are you going to outcompete them when they have first and early access to the godlike powers of next level AIs, et cetera, et cetera. Say there's an AI where you could script it hypothetically to give you favorable returns in the stock market. Well, obviously that's already being employed by people. But if you had the first access to a next level of that was going to be superior, then you're going to suck even more wealth out of the system. We're going to develop new ideas faster or be able to innovate or whatever it may be. The reason that this is an unleveler again is because you can imagine these are the types of tools that tend to make people that are wealthy or have a good productivity capacity more wealthy and are not necessarily going to be useful for the people at the other end of the scale. So if you're downstream in the capital race, say, for example, Bangladesh, it's predicted that 60% of their garment manufacturing industry will be able to be automated in the next 10 years. That's pretty devastating if you're a Bangladeshi and you're dependent upon the one thing that you could sell, which is very, very cheap labor. Or if you're in a wealthy society and you're at a lower rung, say you're a wage-based cleaner, generative AI is not likely to help you with your cleaning. In fact, if anything, it's going to be a threat to your career because at some point someone will develop a robotic system that can entirely replace you. Whereas at the other end of the scale, if you're a Wall Street commodities trader, well, now with AI, you can have an assistant that does all the research that would normally take you hours and lots of cognitive power, that doesn't sleep, can constantly work basically for free and generate advice or reports or whatever it might be to enable you to better do your job so that you could do much more of it and make presumably much more money. And the reason this is interesting to look at is you can already see for the last couple centuries, but especially the last few decades of human development, how the further you are downstream from being a capital power as new technologies come in, the more your legs are tied in the running race. You kind of can't compete as an equal. And I think about this a lot because I live in Hungary, and in the last 20 years, the country has, gotten richer to some extent, but also people feel like their lives are worse. And it's kind of hard to know what they can do about it because, just to pick one example, since joining the European Union, they've got an open market, so they attract all this direct investment, particularly from Germany. They've got plenty of engineering expertise, so they manufacture a lot of cars. I mean, I've got friends working on autonomous driving systems for big companies and things like that. There's plenty of skills to do stuff and energy. But starting a new company today to compete with Mercedes to make the same type of thing that they do is very, very hard. And not only is it hard, but if you do anything that's useful, you can quickly be bought up by the incumbent capital holders. So as a result, things like supermarkets have all been replaced here. There used to be, a few local chains of supermarkets, and now it's kind of all major German supermarkets or French supermarkets or British ones even, because they have that first mover advantage of having developed the business model, having advanced logistics chains, having the large scale capital purchasing and the systems in place for expansion. And that's great for those companies that are really good at what they do. And of course, they're going to outcompete those that are not as effective. But at a social level, that's not so great because if you're Jimmy Tesco sitting in an ivory tower in London, you don't care what the impact to a local community in regional Hungary is of opening another Tesco store. Like, you just care that it happens. It's just a tiny byline on a spreadsheet that you probably don't even get to see because it's so small. But for that local community, it could devastate the local fruit and vegetable growers because now they can't compete, or even if they're making a superior product, because of the advantage of going to Tesco to pick up your cheese. Well, while I'm there, I may as well get my fruit and vegetables, for example. And while I'm there, I may as well get my books. And while I'm there, I may as well get my clothes and whatever. So you've got this sort of growth of a monoculture and the sucking of the wealth, but without any of the social responsibility. And so this is going to radically increase as well, because I think for the hyper-visible billionaires, there's a sense of social responsibility because they're so public and they're so rich. But what about the many, 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 many more numerous hundreds and tens of millionaires who are making their money, say, maybe they develop an automated video algorithm or something like that and sell it to Facebook, and they've got $80 million US or something. I mean, there have been AI people that have been acquired for hundreds of millions at the moment for speculative products. If that's you likely don't even realize all the lives in which you're touching with your product and where your wealth comes from. And so why would you feel any sense of accountability to the entire species? It's so diffuse. Whereas in the past, with aristocrats, they used to be visibly within the community and they would have this wealth. And okay, they've sucked all the wealth in that exact sort of distribution thing in poorer societies, but still noteworthy, the difference. But because of who they were and because you could physically see them and touch them and whatever, there would be a much stronger social obligation to construct narratives for why these people should be giving back to society, whether they're building libraries or building public works or things of beauty or commissioning art, commissioning sculptures, whatever. Whereas now the wealth is much higher and much more anonymous. So there's no tie back into the communities. And it's so divorced, in fact, that when you go to a place like San Francisco, their roads are crap. Their roads are far worse than in Buddha, where I live. I was staying in a part of Oakland where a house would set you back a couple million US dollars. And the roads there are worse than they are in anywhere I've been in Budapest. Which is a place that must be 2,000 times poorer than San Francisco, and that's just basic infrastructure. What about the opportunities to grow cultural things or improve your society in other ways? They kind of go by the roadside, so to speak, as well. So it could end up being one of the biggest questions of our time, I would say. How do we make these incredible wealth holders in any way socially accountable to the rest of us who don't have that wealth and power but still live under the structures of these, I guess, coming emperors? Fun question to think about. There are lots of different mechanisms for doing it, but already they've become so powerful that they've certainly superseded most states, but even the super states are grappling with how to deal with tech giants sort of moving with impunity. You could see that in how the US is trying to acquire TikTok, but also the EU is grappling with making content control demands of large platforms that aren't interested in talking about it, and constantly finding Google, Apple, other large tech monoliths for anti-competitive behavior. The US does it as well, but they don't care. The fines that they pay are just mere blips against the benefits they get, because kind of all of us are in some way giving a small amount of money to these companies all the time. Even in this tiny way, I'm doing it. I'm generating content on this platform. I think 10% or something of all my Patreon money goes to that company. They don't have to do much. They just built the platform and they maintain it. Apple, the app store for Apple is extortionate. It's every app purchase that you make, or purchase that you make through an Apple app, something like 30% of the money goes directly to Apple. And what do they have to do for that? They sit on their hands and watch the money roll in. And that's money that people earn that they historically would have spent in their own societies and reaped some benefit from. But now it's just buying more crypto for the savings of the trillionaires that don't even need it. So the rolling trend of the winner takes all world is going to keep... it's something you can already see. Google, you think of Google as a search engine. What's the second largest search engine? Bing. How many people use Bing? Nobody. Who's the third largest? Who's the fourth largest? If you win early and win well, you're at a great advantage. And if you're in a society that doesn't innovate and doesn't produce these types of companies, or have the conditions for people to do innovating well, you're going to be downstream from that. And in that situation that Hungary is in, that I described with the supermarkets, it's going to be like that for most of the world, but times many exponents of that in terms of impact. I think Australia is a good example of a country that might be in trouble with this, because it's kind of resting on its laurels because we have this insurance of great mineral and resource wealth. But I think we've got Canva. But other than that, I can't think of a large tech innovation that's come from Australia. I mean, there would be smaller level ones. I know that we've got Mike Cannon-Brookes and the other guy from Atlassian. They're billionaires, but these are small potatoes compared to what Grok, Meta, and OpenAI are going to be doing, and their capability to further propel their own growth. I mean, it's interesting to see, because it's still speculative at this point. But, as I said, if things go well, then the disruption is going to be unimaginable. One hedge against all of that people are investing in, which is another great example of this, is Bitcoin. The amount of money that people have poured into Bitcoin, my God, 2.1 trillion US dollars. So it's about on par with Amazon, Alphabet, which is Google, double Berkshire Hathaway, double Tesla, more than Meta. It collectively is worth more than Meta. And what does it do? What utility is generated for the human species from Bitcoin? And who are the people that are becoming wealthy from this growth of its capitalization? I mean, it's democratized in the sense that, of course, anyone can purchase it, but to purchase something, you have to have money. And to purchase an indulgent product like that, you have to have spare money, given that it doesn't do anything. So, I mean, just speaking from my own example, all the people I know that buy Bitcoin live in Sydney or are wealthy public servants or whatever. And it's great to hold something and have it go up or whatever. But that's money that could be in something else that generates something other than sort of money laundering and server farms. I mean, again, if you're an expert at Bitcoin and you want to come on and tell me why it's extremely useful and I'm completely wrong about it, but is it giving more utility to humanity than Google? Hard to say, but as it keeps rising, you can bet that the people that are extremely rich, they're not getting poorer from that. I think Bitcoin actually is a great example of that sort of inverted aristocratic responsibility, where people with extra money what do they do? Like, I mean, if you had more money than God back in the day, you'd think of something fun to do with it. Like I said, build a public pool or start a university or back people to explore the world or whatever it might be. Whereas now, if you've got a bit of extra money, it's a good idea to put it into Bitcoin. And what is the net benefit of everybody for that? Nothing. You just get wealthier as people race to put more and more money into that type of asset. But at some point, there'll be some cool tipping points because money very obviously is limited in how much it can let you enjoy your life. There's only so much you can do if you've got over $100 million that's going to be fun for you until you've got to start thinking about other things that might be cool to do. So sadly, that means that societies that are sort of in the middle and suck won't be attracting that much attention or much of that money without compelling cases, because obviously it's very sexy, say, for Bill Gates to cure malaria, it's and important, that's good stuff to put your money into. If you make $100 billion, it's not very sexy to evidently fix the roads in San Francisco or something like that is probably necessary. So I guess we'll see this split. On the one hand, the coming hyper trillionaires will look on one end to solve the world's worst problems, like, laugh though we may. Bezos is putting a lot of money into climate change. Gates is putting his money into the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which is designed to ameliorate the worst problems of humanity. But then at the other end of the scale, maybe we'll get a bunch of hyper really cool things that's currently manifesting, I guess, through Elon, Bezos, and Richard Branson's sort of space race, where they are competing to build larger rockets and do human space travel. That's cool. I think it's not appealing to me because I don't care about it, but it's interesting and advances the project of the species. But what other types of things, like, again, if you've got more money than God and you're looking to improve the realms of human adventure, maybe we will get some really cool projects. And maybe, Viktor Orban here, he's not that rich compared to these guys, but he was able to use the power of the state to build a sports stadium in his home village. What's the equivalent going to look like for if Elon has $1 trillion? Like, what's he going to do? Is he going to turn that money to improving South Africa, which really, really could use some improving at the moment? Or I don't know. It's speculative. I'm optimistic that plenty of cool stuff will emerge, but it's going to be a problem for the remaining 7.99 billion of us that will have very disrupted societies and need to figure out what to do. Which leads me to my promised third chapter here. What do we do? What do we do with this information? Well, the good news is I think that it's kind of the same type of problem as always. It means that now I wouldn't be investing in a particularly fixed view of the future in terms of what my career would be like or what my society was certain to look like, because change is always a constant and we're at the cusp of many rapid changes, or going through them as mentioned. But the things that actually bring joy in life, the things that actually bring meaning, will remain equally accessible, if not more accessible. It just will potentially feel shitter because it'll be easier to compare ourselves to people who have access to all sorts of wondrous miracles that we will have the shitty subscription ad-based freemium model of. But would I swap my life today for any of theirs? Like, a definitive no. Because I get to have a great time with the people that I love, with my kids, eating good food, living in a nice natural environment in a beautiful city. That's something that's really special to me, and that's not going to change. And that's something that you can still invest in. So given I am giving advice, I would say, if hearing about these rapid transitions and the hyper sort of Bioshock level hellscapes we're likely to be seeing in a few ways, just as always, cultivating the small things that are going to pay the highest dividends in your life, like caring for your friends and having nice, loving relationships and learning things for yourself and getting skills and, planting a garden, whatever it might be. Those little things, they're going to be more important than ever, and perhaps culturally further away. So worth sort of doubling down on, focusing on. It's hard to do a lot of those things now. You kind of have to go against the grain of what a daily expectation is, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, I think the dissatisfaction of the kind of proxy serfdom and sort of unconscious servitude as we sort of hand over more and more of our societies to these realms, it's a simple antidote, and it's not to trade in it too much. But I don't know, what do you think? I'm really interested in hearing what you think. Please get in touch or leave a comment underneath wherever you are accessing this from, and let's get a dialogue going, because it's a brave new world, etc., etc. Even this last month, a couple of big things have happened. There was that AI band that was getting hundreds of thousands of plays on Spotify, which is hundreds of thousands of plays more than I get on Spotify. And they were completely made up their music, the band, the images, everything. And also Grok has released a companion mode, which means that I guess millions of people will be masturbating to a new type of cyber friend, and maybe falling in love with them. That seems to be happening in increasing numbers as well. Interesting days. Interesting days. I might have to get a guest back to talk about it because there's inevitably huge swathes of things that I've missed here. But hopefully you've enjoyed the episode all the same. And I'll be back next week. For my patrons, I'm also going to do a bonus episode this week on the best Australian music of all time to coincide with the Triple J Hottest 100 of all time. I think there's heaps of interesting stuff to look at there. So if you're a patron, keep your eyes peeled. Everyone, thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you soon. Bye.